This morning, Nintendo did an hour-long presentation revealing the Switch 2. This presentation covered a lot of information, but left out some crucial details, like pricing, that have come out over the course of the day. After spending the day reading and watching everything I could, from product listings to developer interviews, I wanted to share my reaction and thoughts on the Switch 2. Everything from the better-than-expected offering of tech to the, well, whatever you want to call the pricing situation. The first thing I want to highlight is the tech specs of the display. They are far more robust than I was expecting. The thing that took me most by surprise was that the Switch 2 has a 120Hz display, enabling gameplay at frame rates higher than 60 FPS. Part of why this is so shocking is that there are many Switch 1 games that fall far short of being able to hit even 60 FPS. Many people might even question why Nintendo would include a 120Hz display when a handheld is unlikely to be able to hit those sorts of frame rates playing modern games. But actually, I think this is a great fit for a Nintendo device, and specifically for Nintendo's games. Nintendo isn't focused on making graphical showpieces the way someone like Sony is. They're focused on gameplay first and utilize strong art direction to compensate for not having state-of-the-art visuals. And it seems clear from the games they showcase that they plan to continue in this direction. What this means is that it's likely that many games Nintendo puts out will be able to run at frame rates higher than 60 FPS. Think about games like Mario Wonder, WarioWare, Rhythm Heaven. Nintendo puts out a lot of games that simply won't tax the hardware, and now all of those games will look absolutely incredible on the Switch 2. Additionally, while Nintendo didn't mention it in their presentation, the screen is, in fact, a VRR display. This is huge for games that can't hit a locked 60 FPS. Those games will be able to run unlocked, and it won't matter if the game's actually running at 55 FPS for a scene. It will still look great. Considering how many Switch 1 games struggled to hit stable frame rates towards the end of its lifespan, and that history will likely repeat itself with the Switch 2 as the years go on, VRR will be huge for keeping modern games playable on the Switch 2 for years to come, even if their frame rates dip into the 40s. One last note on the screen is that it's technically an HDR screen. Personally, I don't think this means much of anything. HDR on an LCD isn't all that impressive visually, in my opinion. I suspect this is just future-proofing. Nintendo is requiring all Switch 2 games to support HDR so that when they inevitably release the Switch 2 OLED, every Switch 2 game will already have HDR support, enabling those games to make full use of the OLED display. I think it's a great move by Nintendo to set themselves up for the future, but is basically meaningless to us for the time being. Next, I want to talk over some of the features the Switch 2 is going to have. Or perhaps we could call some of them gimmicks, if you're feeling a bit cynical. The big one that Nintendo spent a lot of time focusing on was GameChat, which seems to be Nintendo's answer to the experience of using Discord as a PC gamer. The UI was even extremely reminiscent of Discord. In fact, at first, I thought they were just showing off Discord integration. Everything they showed off with GameChat looks like a useful tool that's going to be great for playing games online with your friends. It looks modern and reflects the way people actually play games with their friends in the year 2025, which is very surprising to see Nintendo get right when they are notoriously behind the times on everything online. However, to be honest, I find it difficult to get very excited about GameChat. Perhaps it's just that, as a PC gamer, all of this feels like old news to me, or the fact that the streams of games looked like they were running at 4 FPS even when made to be full screen. But I think my main problem with this feature is that it requires your entire friend group to own a Switch 2. I've played countless games with my friends in exactly the way Nintendo showed off. But thinking about those friend groups, I'm absolutely certain that about half of them will not be purchasing a Switch 2 anytime soon. And without the ability to use GameChat to stream my games directly to them on a PC, we're just going to end up playing PC games like we always do. I feel like I don't have the perspective to know if this is just my personal experience, though, or something more universal. So I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think about GameChat and if it seems useful to you in the comments. A far more interesting offshoot of this tech, however, is GameShare, which wasn't talked about too much in the presentation, but I personally think looks really, really cool. Old gamers like me will recognize GameShare as a new form of download play, returning from the GBA and DS era of Nintendo handhelds. The general idea back then was that if one person had a copy of a multiplayer game, they could use a link cable or wireless to download a client version of the game to other players' devices without them having to own the game, so that you could play multiplayer games with your friends without having to twist their arms to get them to all purchase a copy of the game. GameShare is a new twist on that idea. Instead of downloading a bespoke client version of the game, it instead just streams the game to them over wireless. This means that there might be a smidge of lag for players not playing in the host system, but with modern wireless streaming tech, it should be pretty negligible. The thing that makes this feature really stand out to me is that they showed it can stream different screens to different devices. It doesn't just mirror the main system's display. So, for instance, you could play poker and everyone would be seeing their own hand on their own device. Or you could play a game of Advance Wars like in the olden days, and each player could take their own turns at the same time, despite there being only one device actually running the game. This is basically the same tech the Wii U gamepad used, but re-implemented in a way that gives the tech far more uses. They even showed that you can use GameShare online through GameChat and over local wireless with Switch Ones. One of the things that excites me most about this tech is that it could be expanded to do far more than just what they shown off here. Being able to stream a second screen to a Switch One could enable them to bring Wii U, DS, and 3DS emulated games to the Switch 2 with the dual screen gameplay fully intact. It could also be utilized in titles that benefit from a touchscreen like Mario Maker 2 to restore the second screen functionality that made the original so great. The sky's the limit here, and Nintendo has already talked about wanting to update Switch 1 games so they're compatible with this feature, and I'm very excited to see what else they do with it. While we're talking about GameShare, I guess I should mention my thoughts on the camera. Here goes. I think it's pretty useless. Nobody wants to make themselves presentable or do their makeup in order to play a game with their friends in their own home. While it was nice to do video calls sometimes during the pandemic, I still found the majority of the time I was just doing voice calls with my friends. And now that the pandemic is over, I find myself exclusively doing voice calls. Do you guys regularly do video calls when gaming with your friends? Am I just out of touch? As for using it in games, after having used the Kinect, which was much more advanced than this and still sucked, I'm not optimistic the camera-controlled games will play very well either. On a very different note, a surprising feature for Nintendo was the addition of a mouse control mode by embedding an optical laser in each of the Joy-Cons. While I'm sure everyone's minds jumps straight to mouse controls and shooters, I think this actually benefits touchscreen gaming the most. Touchscreen games on the Switch 1 suffered from a major issue where they simply didn't work while docked because you didn't have access to the touchscreen. A mouse cursor will be able to do a lot of what touchscreen controls could, enabling you to play these sorts of games in docked mode, and hopefully meaning we get more of them on the Switch 2. Nintendo consoles used to be all about touchscreen games with the DS and 3DS, but they kinda dried up with the Switch 1, which is a shame because there are some I really miss. Elite Beat Agents 2, please, Nintendo? As for the aforementioned mouse controls and shooters, to be honest, I'm feeling a bit skeptical. I don't think the Joy-Con will be comfortable to use in mouse mode for long periods of time. So as far as I'm concerned, this is only really a useful feature for shooters if the Switch 2 supports USB mice. If it does, then this is a game changer, and I look forward to crushing all the unsuspecting 12-year-olds when Splatoon 4 comes out. One thing that's still a mystery at the moment is the joysticks in the Switch 2. The joysticks in the Switch 1 were notoriously bad, And when my third Switch Pro controller failed on me last year, my soul nearly left my body, being forced to fork over $70 yet again to buy another shitty controller. Between the constant complaints and the class action lawsuits, it seems like Nintendo might have improved things. Maybe. It's not really clear. But based on the interviews with Switch 2 developers, it seems possible that the Switch 2 will be using Hall effect joysticks. If this is the case, this would be huge, as Hall effect joysticks are far more accurate and have a theoretical lifespan of hundreds of years, instead of, one day after the 30-day warranty expires. So I really, really hope this turns out to be the case. I don't think my heart could take another terrible joystick situation, or my wallet, for that matter. One of the most confusing parts of the Switch 2 reveal has been the topic of backwards compatibility, and upgrades for Switch 2 editions of Switch 1 games. The presentation would have you believe that all Switch 1 games are perfectly backwards compatible, and also that you'll be forking over money to get Switch 2 upgrades of all Switch 1 games. Neither are true. The Switch 2 is not backwards compatible with the Switch 1 on a hardware level. Based on interviews with Nintendo developers, it seems like they're using a translation layer, similar to how the Steam Deck runs Windows games under Linux. And, much like the Steam Deck, that means there are currently compatibility issues that Nintendo will be working on an ongoing basis. Nintendo actually has an excellent website detailing the current state of backwards compatibility, where they're at in testing for the over 10,000 games, and promises constant updates and improvements. I'm really, really impressed with this level of transparency, and wanted to give kudos to Nintendo here for such a robust resource on the state of game compatibility. Looking over the list, there doesn't seem to be any major titles that stand out to me, and the only game I personally own with compatibility issues is Overcooked. But hopefully Nintendo can get these issues ironed out prior to or shortly after launch. And as much as this sounds like bad news for backwards compatibility, it's actually kinda good news. Most Nintendo consoles with backwards compatibility have simply included the hardware of the previous console inside of them. This means that those games ran exactly the same as they did on original hardware. No worse and no better. This implementation means that Switch 1 games will have the full power of the Switch 2 at their disposal. Many games will likely run better even without upgrades or patches. Games with unlocked frame rates or variable resolutions will simply run with their frame rates and resolutions maxed out at all times. And loading times will likely be drastically reduced. As for the topic of Switch 2 upgrades, I will say that this caused me some worry after the presentation. It implied a world where we're going to be paying $10 to $20 per game in order to get them to run at higher resolutions or frame rates. First of all, we now know that many Switch 1 games will run and look better without even the need for a patch. But more importantly, we've learned that many Switch 1 games will be getting free updates for the Switch 2. This includes Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, as well as the 2D Zelda games, both of which sorely needed performance improvements. It seems that the upgrades Nintendo plans to charge for truly are upgrades. They either have new DLC bundled in, or in the case of the Zelda games, probably required substantial work to run at higher frame rates. As far as I'm aware from playing emulated versions of Breath of the Wild, many animations in the game only play at 30 FPS. So if they wanted the game to run at 60 or even 120 FPS, they would have had to go back and redo nearly every animation in the game. At which point it feels pretty fair to charge for that, as it's basically a remaster at that point. There's one more thing that takes the edge off of these upgrades a bit. It seems that at least some of them are included in the Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pass subscription. The website currently lists both of the Zelda games as being included, but some graphics elsewhere imply that perhaps all of the Nintendo upgrades will be included, And the reason that only the Zelda games are listed at the moment is because those are the only two that will be ready for launch. If this is the case, this feels quite a bit better as far as I'm concerned. You can either buy these substantial upgrades for a handful of games if you want to own them, but they're effectively free for Nintendo's most dedicated customers who are paying for the premium NSO subscription. This does lead into a broader discussion on price, though, which is where things start to get a bit grim. In the US, where I live, the Switch 2 will cost $450, with a bundle that comes with a digital copy of Mario Kart World for $500. The Pro Controller costs $80, and the camera attachment costs $50. This is a lot of money. More than I expected. But that would be a pill I could swallow if it weren't for the massively increased price of the Switch 2 games. Mario Kart World is $80. Donkey Kong Bonanza is $70. And as I write this part of my script, a news article just went live saying that the Switch 2 versions of all of Nintendo's games are being listed for $80, with the exception of Breath of the Wild, which is $70. These prices feel absurd, upsetting. The internet is in an uproar, and I can't say that I'm too happy about it either. But, as I've been sitting here thinking about this all day, I have to say that while this isn't good, it really shouldn't have been unexpected. The unfortunate reality is that right now prices for everything are skyrocketing. Whether you point the finger at greedflation, tariffs, or increased cost of tech manufacturing, the Switch 2 was always going to get hit hard. And there's even more factors beyond that. For instance, the Switch 2 cartridges can't be cheap for Nintendo to produce. They're high-speed storage that enables the sort of instant loading that's standard on PS5. And with the file sizes of games getting larger and larger, the cost to produce these is likely significantly higher even before all of the economic nonsense is taken into account. Sony and Microsoft don't have these costs for their physical games, after all. A Blu-ray costs the same to print regardless of how much data is on it. And read speeds don't matter because it has to install to the internal storage anyways. But Switch 2 games have to actually run off of these cartridges at high speeds. But even with all of these explanations, I still feel like it doesn't quite excuse this pricing. Nintendo is notorious for having high margins on all of their products. And given the state of the world right now, they really should have just bit the bullet on costs on at least the base console. It just feels like greed, especially when you add everything up. Higher costs for games, paid game upgrades, hell, even the tech demo game designed to show off the Switch 2's features is a paid purchase instead of a free pack-in. It all contributes to the feeling that Nintendo is pushing too far, charging too much. Now, surely the Switch 2 will sell out at launch regardless. Super fans and content creators will buy it at almost any price. I certainly feel compelled to buy it at any price, after all. But this reminds me of the 3DS's disastrous launch. It simply cost too much, and they had to give it a massive price cut just a few months after launch in order to save the device from abysmal failure. I wonder if history is about to repeat itself. I'd rather not end the video on such a downer, so let's talk about the most exciting part of the presentation, the new games. I think Mario Kart World looks fantastic. And while we don't know all the details yet, I wonder if the game is going to be incorporating live service aspects like Mario Kart Tour to keep the game fresh and evolving. Weekly challenges, new maps, heck, maybe there'll be a course creator where you can just draw a track through the open world, and that becomes a new race course you can race on, maybe with online sharing. I think the potential is there for something really, really exciting. Provided the Switch 2 doesn't cost so much that none of my friends buy it, that is. The new Donkey Kong game also looked incredible. I think this game really shows off how Nintendo is looking to use the increased power of the Switch 2. Not to increase the graphical fidelity of their games by huge leaps and bounds, but to come up with new gameplay that wasn't possible before. This sort of landscape interactivity and deformation is a rarity in games, even modern games on consoles, and I'm really excited to see what Nintendo can do with it. Visually, the game looks like it's an evolution of the Super Mario Odyssey engine, so presumably the same team of developers is making this game, which means it's almost guaranteed to be incredible. Nintendo has been making Mario games as 3D platformers for so long. I'm really excited to see their prowess put to use on a very different type of 3D platformer. As for the other game reveals, they missed me a bit. I'm not a Souls-like enjoyer, so while I'm sure that exclusive From Software game is a huge get for some people, it's not something I'm super interested in. Kirby Air Riders is one that I am interested in, though. I missed the original game on the GameCube, but all my friends loved it and still talk about it all the time. I know they're super excited for this game, especially if it features an evolution of the beloved City Trial mode. Based on what I know, I think it would make for a really cool online battle royale style game, and with Sakurai at the helm, I'm confident that whatever it is will be fun. I think that about covers it for this video. If you enjoyed this discussion or found it helpful, I'd appreciate it if you left a like or shared it with a friend. It really does make a huge difference, and with the prices here, well, my wallet could use the help. I'm really interested in hearing what you guys think about all this. Are you going to get a Switch 2 despite the price hike? Even if you're upset about the increased prices, do you think Nintendo is being greedy or just this should just be the expectation these days? And the online discussion has been so dominated by price, I'd really love to hear what you guys think about the device itself. I'm pretty impressed with the specs of the device. Are you as well? Is this enough to replace something like your Steam Deck or to complement it? I certainly think the VRR is very tempting in that regard. Despite some of the bad news, I overall find myself really excited by the Switch 2. I'll be staying tuned to what comes next, and I hope you guys stay tuned for the content I put out next too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.